Let me explain everything before you judge. This isn't a story of a single moment or an event that happened suddenly. It was something that built up over the years, creeping in quietly, something I tried to ignore, push down, and hide. But that evening, when Ethan called me, everything changed. Now weeks have passed since that moment, yet the tension from that night still clings to me like a shadow. No matter how much I try to shake it off, I can feel its weight pressing against me. That night plays in my mind over and over again, like a puzzle I can't solve. I remember stepping out of my bedroom, the familiar exhaustion from the day settling deep into my bones. I reached for my robe, letting my loose hair fall over my shoulders. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. I knew something inside me was shifting, but I didn't want to acknowledge it, didn't want to let it show. As I moved toward the corridor, I suddenly noticed someone, Ethan. He stood right in front of me, watching me with an unreadable expression. His posture was steady, but there was something about his gaze, something that made my breath hitch. For a moment, I became aware of my own presence in that hallway, how my shoulders slumped under the weight of my thoughts, how time had changed both of us. Ethan wasn't the same anymore. His once youthful features had sharpened into something more mature, more certain. Yet, in his eyes, there was a quiet storm, something restless, something restrained. Then, he took a step closer, too close. I felt his presence like a force in the air, thick with unspoken words. My heart pounded against my ribs, my hands tightening around the folds of my robe. I didn't know what to do. Everything in that moment was stretching, growing bigger, pressing in from all sides. And then he spoke. "Mum, you don't have to," he said, his voice soft but firm. It was the way he said it that made my stomach twist. The weight behind his words. The way his gaze didn't waver, didn't look away. I swallowed hard. "Ethan, stop," I managed, but my voice came out unsteady. "Don't be so close. This isn't right." But he didn't move. He just looked at me, his expression unwavering, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling before I even understood it myself. I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned and hurried away, heading straight for the bathroom. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, my breathing uneven. The moment I closed the door behind me, I pressed my hands against the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. What is happening to me? The cold water from the faucet numbed my fingertips as I splashed it against my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. My thoughts raced. Ethan's words, his expression, they had stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to face. And then there was Daniel, my husband. He wasn't home that night. He had been away on a business trip for days, and lately his absence had started to feel more permanent, even when he was physically there. The distance between us had grown over time, like a quiet erosion that neither of us had the energy to stop. What was left of our connection? A habit, maybe? A routine? Something that once held meaning, but now felt like an obligation. Ethan's voice echoed in my head again. "You don't have to continue with this life." I gripped the edges of the sink. I wasn't going to let my thoughts spiral down that path. This was just exhaustion, a moment of weakness. Taking a deep breath, I shut off the water and forced myself to step away from the mirror. I needed to act normal, to hold myself together. But when I stepped out of the bathroom and into the quiet house, the weight of everything still clung to me. I dressed quickly, throwing on a pair of loose shorts and a simple top, hoping comfort would bring me some sense of normalcy. Then I made my way to the kitchen. Maybe keeping my hands busy with cooking would help push these thoughts away. But as I moved through the house, the silence felt different charged, like the pause before a storm. When I entered the kitchen, Ethan was already there. He was sitting at the table, staring down at nothing in particular. As I stepped inside, he lifted his head to look at me. That look! It was enough to make my pulse skip. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, as if the silence was too heavy to bear, Ethan finally said, "Mum, we can't keep pretending." His voice was firm, certain. I gripped the counter behind me. "Ethan, don't. You have to leave this life," he continued. "You know it. I know it." My breath caught in my throat. His words weren't just words. They carried the weight of everything we had been avoiding. The truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the room. Did I forget my passport? I froze. Daniel. His voice came from the hallway, his footsteps growing louder as he approached. His voice came from the hallway, his footsteps growing louder as he approached. And shattered. Ethan and I pulled away from each other instinctively, as if an invisible wall had slammed between us. My hands felt ice cold as I turned toward my husband, who was now standing in the doorway, glancing around as if he had just walked into something he couldn't quite place. I grabbed his passport from the counter, handing it to him with forced steadiness. "Here, have a safe trip." He took it without question, without even looking at me too closely. The door shut behind him a moment later, and just like that, he was gone again. Ethan didn't say another word. He just turned and left the kitchen, disappearing into the house. And I stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind caught in an endless loop of questions I couldn't answer. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's expression, his certainty, his urgency. You have to leave this life. And then there was Daniel. He had been here, right in front of me, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I had handed him his passport, spoken to him like everything was normal, and watched as he walked back out of my life without a second glance. Was this what our marriage had become? A series of passing conversations, like actors in a play, reciting the same lines over and over again. I turned onto my side, clutching the edge of the blanket, but the thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. And then footsteps, quiet, careful. I wasn't alone. I sat up slowly, my breath catching in my throat. My bedroom door was slightly open, and through the dim light, I could see a shadow just beyond it. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something I didn't quite understand. Then Ethan stepped inside. My pulse quickened, but I stayed frozen, waiting. "Mom," he said softly, his voice steady. "We can't keep avoiding this." I swallowed hard, shaking my head. "Ethan, You shouldn't be here. He didn't move. I mean it. You can't keep living like this. I see it. You know it. I exhaled sharply, running a hand over my face. Ethan, You're not happy, he interrupted. You don't even try to hide it anymore. The words hit me like a cold wind. He was right. I had been trying to ignore it for so long, convincing myself that things would fix themselves, that Daniel and I would somehow find our way back to each other. But we never did. We just drifted further apart, living side by side without truly seeing each other. I don't know what to do, I admitted in a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze firm but not unkind. Then stop pretending. Stop waiting for things to change when they won't. His words made something inside me crack. But before I could respond, fear gripped me. My eyes darted to the door, to the silence of the house beyond it. Daniel will be back, I said quickly, as if saying it out loud would change something. Ethan let out a slow breath, nodding. He understood what I was saying, but he didn't back down. Maybe, he said, but even if he does, is that the life you want? I didn't have an answer. He watched me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to say something, but when I didn't, he finally stepped back, his expression unreadable. I just want you to be honest with yourself, he said, before turning toward the door. Then, just like that, he was gone. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. I went through the motions making coffee, tidying up, forcing normalcy into a life that no longer felt real. Ethan was quiet too. He sat at the kitchen table, eating breakfast in silence, as if the conversation from the night before had never happened. But I knew better. Every glance, every shift in posturate was all there, just beneath the surface. And then, later that afternoon, a sound shattered the fragile quiet. The front door opened. Daniel was home. He stepped inside, setting down his bag, stretching his shoulders like he was returning from just another ordinary trip. His eyes flicked to me, offering a small, tired smile. Hey! I forced a smile back. Hey! For a brief moment, everything felt normal. The familiar exchange, the routine of it all. But then Daniel's gaze shifted, landing on Ethan, who stood a few feet away, watching. Something in the air changed. I felt it. Ethan felt it. And I knew, in that moment, that something between us had cracked beyond repair. Daniel frowned slightly, glancing between us. Everything okay? I opened my mouth, ready to say, yes, ready to keep the act going, to fall back into the role I had played for years. But I hesitated, and Ethan saw it. He gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, you know the truth. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and then, finally, I said the words I had been too afraid to say for so long. Number everything isn't okay. Daniel's expression shifted confusion, then concern, then something else. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. I think we need to talk, I said, my voice steady for the first time in a long time. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. For the first time in years, I was finally facing the truth.